Hey everybody, Daniel Davis Deep Dive here for a Friday afternoon show. Again, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. There was an article that was making the rounds today in various outlets in the West here that there is some problem with the F-16 supplies going to Ukraine, and the fact that the Russians are bracing for it, as the UK intelligence report has discussed, as you see on the headline right there. That's from Ukrainsky Pravda. And so that kind of brings up an issue I want to discuss a little bit, because we kind of alluded to it earlier this afternoon in our deep dive on the Ukraine-Russia war, where we talked about the fact that the war is unwinnable for Ukraine. And in that episode, I did mention that even the application of F-16s is not going to change the dynamic. I wanted to address that here because a lot of people aren't really sure why that is, and in fact believe it to be the opposite. So in addition to what you just saw right there with Russia has been spending time getting ready to expand its air defense capacity. What you see right there, by the way, is an A-50 airborne warning system. Basically, it's like the AWACS that we have. And what that is going to do is it's going to expand and make more sophisticated the Russian air defense system, which they're now modifying to make it more useful to actually shoot down F-16s when they come into their airspace. But I want to show you what one of the experts said here just a little bit ago, a couple of months ago, on the F-16 when it was first announced that it was going to be sent to the Ukraine side.
Visiting Denmark Monday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky climbed into the cockpit of an F-16. After months of trying, Kyiv has secured the delivery of the Western jets. Ukraine has been asking for F-16s since Russia's February 2022 invasion, but Western allies held off, fearing escalation of the war. It will take months for Ukrainian pilots to be trained. The delay could prove costly, says Berry.
I still think it's coming too late, to be honest with you. Politics is moving. We'll see what happens, but whether Ukraine can come around to and have these F-16s ready, enough of them trained up and ready to go to basically go for version 2 of a summer offensive next summer. If the political appetite and the fiscal appetite is there for that, we'll see.
For now, Ukraine's summer ground offensive grinds on slowly.
Now, one of the big reasons why the Ukraine summer offensive did grind on slowly, why it didn't really accomplish much, aside from many of the things we've talked about there, is the fact that Ukraine had insufficient artillery. They didn't have mine clearing equipment. They didn't have air defense capacity, and they didn't have an offensive air capacity. The Ukraine Air Force is from the old Soviet time. The MiG-29s is about the best that they have, and they have some others that aren't quite that good. But they're all susceptible to the Russian air defense system. And Russia does have a very adequate and robust air defense system. It's multi-layered. It's quite effective and very modern in comparison to the Ukraine side, especially. But it's also modern in comparison to our side. There's long been concern among the West and in NATO that if there had ever been a Russia-NATO war, that their air defense capacities were, and their their Su-35 aircraft were a big threat to the F-16s, because the F-16s, you got to understand, this is not a modern weapon. These are old jets. They've been around for decades. So that's nothing by themselves new, nothing that Russia hadn't already spent years trying to figure out. So adding in a number of F-16s is not going to change the dynamics over what's already there, because it's just going to be another aircraft. I think it's fair to say that they are an improvement over the MiG-29s that the Ukraine side has been flying. But I cannot stress how difficult it is to take a pilot who's good in a Soviet system and has been in the Soviet system all of his life, and that includes the tactics of flying as well as the technique of how to operate the aircraft, and then transfer that over to the U.S. side. It's much more difficult than you think. And it's one thing to teach someone how to operate the controls and to get the aircraft up in the air and land it safely. That's one level. But fighting the jet is a very different thing, and it's a very complex thing. In the United States, when we fly the F-16s and when we use them, and we have many times, I believe it was F-16s the other day that fired strikes into Syria in response to some of the attacks on the U.S. forces in that region. So they're a good aircraft. That's why we have them in our inventory. But they're also part of a very complicated and multi-layered air defense system and a command and control system that relies on ground radar, airborne platforms like the AWACS, other aircraft sometimes, and then our own systems and terrestrial systems that operate. All those things work together in communication systems with the pilots and typically with ground attack capacities as well. And so that thing fits into an integrated air system. Ukraine doesn't have that. In fact, it'll be almost completely standalone because all they have is an antiquated Soviet system, and you can't graft this on top of it. So you have the problem with the pilots, you have a problem with the system that's going to be operating within, and you have a problem with the Russians having already capacity to shoot down F-16s. And now then they've had, months now to continue to refine that capability. That's one of the things that apparently the British intelligence report was talking about here. And that's why it became news today, because Russia is expanding it. And that's one of the other things of war that's so often overlooked. And that is that nothing ever stands still. The Ukraine side doesn't stand still. They're always evolving. The Russian side doesn't stand still. Too many times we say, okay, well, we got these aircraft in, I forget what month. I think it was August that the U.S. finally decided to go ahead and give it to them. And so the idea in many people's minds was, okay, well, we'll graft that on top of the dynamic that exists right now, and that will give Ukraine a big boost. What they didn't think about was that the lag time to get those pilots trained, to get the aircraft allocated there, to get the sustainment positions going along with it. And that's another thing that gives little notoriety, but it is a huge issue because those jets are very difficult to maintain. They're very finicky, and they require a lot of maintenance, and that means highly trained crew with lots of spare parts and other kinds of maintenance of fluids and other kinds of materials that's necessary to keep those jets in the air. That's going to all be challenging. And you put all that together, and you just see that it's going to take many months for those pilots to get in. Getting them in the air is one thing, but it will take, probably a year of operating the aircraft to really say to get good. And that assumes that they have complete support on the ground. And I'm not sure that that's a given and a guarantee. It's just not sure that's going to be the case. And there's not that many trained pilots in Ukraine that you can just immediately transfer over to the other. Now, they may try to get some more trained from scratch, but that's going to take, years to get done to really get combat capable pilots. And I just can't stress that enough. That's what's necessary here. So it probably will add some capacity to Ukraine. It does have longer range, and it can fire at targets deeper inside Russian controlled territory than their current jets can. But it's not going to be that many. And frankly, the air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles, are not in that great a supply already, because we've given some of those missiles and retrofitted them onto the Ukraine aircraft and their Air Force already. So the bottom line to all this is, don't hold your breath that this is going to make any difference. It's going to make an incremental improvement in the capacity. But please watch our deep dive we did earlier this afternoon when we talk a little bit more detail. The war effort for Ukraine is not going to be able to turn this war around, and grafting on a couple of planes on top of it, it's not going to change the dynamic. That's the unfortunate truth of it. That's your deep dive today. We are going to continue to look out for you. We are in this together all the way through. We're looking out for you, and we're going to continue to do so here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Thanks, and see you next time.